If it seems like your world has come to an end, what next? I'm Dr. Carol, and thank you for joining me on this program today. A lot of people face something like that. I faced that when my husband died, and I faced similar, though not quite as difficult, at other moments in my life. But we all, I believe, throughout our life are likely to have one or more times when it seems like this is the end. And what possibly could life offer going forward? My guest today, Dawn Mann Sanders, has been there more than once, but most specifically when her husband unexpectedly died. But more important than just the grief, although that is super important, Dawn has also, in her own life and now for others, worked out just a way to think about and with God walk through what it means to build your life again after it seems like your world has ended. Dawn is an author, a Bible teacher, an associate minister. She runs the small group ministry at their church. She has been preaching and teaching at churches, retreats, and universities for over 2 decades, and most recently is releasing a book, When Your World Ends: God's Creative Process for Rebuilding a Life. Incredibly biblical, insightful, and real, because Dawn has lived this. She's walked, and in some ways is still walking this out right now. And she can help you understand God's process for rebuilding a life when your world ends. Here's Dawn Mann Sanders. What a pleasure and an honor to have you on the program today. First of all, just thank you for being here, taking this time, being ready to share your heart. It's great.
Well, Dr. Carol, I want to say thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really honored that you've invited me. Thank you.
Well, seeing some of your work and reading your book opened some places in my heart, because there's some times when I have felt like my world ended. And maybe just as we start, uh, let people know how you came to address this topic. I have seen so many times how the very things God brings us into in ministering to others are things we've had to walk through ourselves. So what are those pieces of your story that brought you to this?
Yeah, definitely that situation for me that I had to walk through it. And I had been through a series of unproductive relationships, as many of us are, before I met the right one. And I met the my husband, Reggie, and we got married, and we had told ourselves that we were going to have a year just to ourselves, even though we met after 40. um, before we started trying to have a family. But a year into our marriage, we started trying to have a family. And as many people do, we struggled. I had 2 miscarriages, um, 6 months apart. And
Mm,
then 6 weeks after the second miscarriage, my husband died suddenly of a massive heart attack while out jogging.
mm.
And needless to say, I found myself my whole life just kind of
Yeah.
turned upside down. I had left full-time work for full-time ministry 6 months before my husband died. So in the midst of all of this happening too, um, I was trying to start my own writing and speaking career. Um, and I had been blessed with my first freelance article to be published about 3 months into that. And then Dr. Carol, the day before my husband died, we received notice that we were going to have um, a 6 session speaking engagement. And then the very next day, he passed away.
Whoa. Whoa.
And I was, like I said, totally blown for a loop for more than a minute.
Mm,
And when I finally came up for air, um, I was like, how do I rebuild my life
yeah.
after all of this has happened? And when I say come up for air after my grieving season, it was like, okay, I've grieved. How do I now start actually rebuilding?
Yeah.
And found myself floundering. Um, and I was really surprised because I had reached some levels of success in my life. I'd had this wonderful marriage. I had had a career as a software tester for over 20 years that I had reached the heights of before I left it to go into full-time ministry. And so I thought I had some um, processes and some systems in my life that I could follow to help rebuild, but I found that none of them were working.
Mm,
That in this season, God was doing a new thing, as my
yeah.
sign says, and how was I going to rebuild from there? And the
Yeah.
book is the 7-step process that God led me to for rebuilding my life and sharing with others.
Yeah, and I got some questions about that. I'm just connecting when somebody who has actually lived it. There's just a different level there than just some theoretical, and you have lived it, and in a sense, you and I are both still living it. At first, just don't want to pass over the grieving process too quickly, and I just want to first of all pause and honor that, honor your husband Reggie, and the grief process. I've walked through that with the death of my husband. And you do make a point early in what you write that when we minimize the grief or we try and ignore or push that away, it actually dishonors the loss. If it is the death of a person, it dishonors that person when we just wipe those feelings away. That it's appropriate and even godly to sit with that. The grief doesn't have to be minimized.
Yeah. Um, I really came to a point where instead of asking why, I
Mhm.
really felt that minimizing my grief was not paying tribute and giving honor to my husband.
Yeah, yeah,
Mainly because the grief that we experience is an expression of the feelings, the deep feelings that we had towards this person or this dream or this opportunity or whatever it was in our lives that we became attached to.
mhm,
That attachment is feelings, that we have these strong, deep feelings for whatever it is, and that by minimizing it, I'm basically invalidating my own feelings. No one else is discounting my feelings. I'm doing it to myself by burying them and pushing them down. And one of the reasons we do that is because we're going around asking, why did this happen? Looking
yeah,
for some validation outside of ourselves, outside of God. And why did it happen? And God was showing me that He was giving me answers. The challenge was that the answers weren't satisfying,
yes,
because when we've lost something this valuable to us, right, there is no good reason
right,
for losing it.
right,
It's just reasons, right? And there are no satisfying, I shouldn't say there are no good reasons. There are lots of good reasons. There are lots of godly reasons, but there are no satisfying reasons that are going to make it okay in our hearts and our minds that we are without this. And so I realized that I was going to go unsatisfied in this moment, that this was not a moment where I was going to reach satisfaction. But that didn't mean that I didn't have good answers. That didn't mean that I couldn't go on, right? It just meant
yes,
that in this moment, right, I wasn't going to reach satisfaction. That God had other things for me, though, that were
yes,
going to be satisfying. And that if I got through this season, that I allowed this these emotions to pass, right, that I would go to the other side.
yes,
And that reminds me of something, Sandra, I'm sorry, Dr.
yes,
Carol, that I'd like to share with your listeners.
sure.
In Ephesians, it says, "Be angry and sin not."
Mhm.
Paul is actually quoting Psalms in that passage.
Yeah,
And in the Hebrew, where it says angry in the way most of our English translations translate it, in the Hebrew, that word translated angry means strong emotion. So it isn't necessarily anger, but I mean, it could be hurt or
yeah,
sadness or disappointment, but a strong emotion. And the physical manifestation is like trembling or quivering. So an emotion that moves you, right?
yeah,
That when we feel something that moves us, don't have it move you to sin,
mhm, mhm,
right? Have it move you in a way that's godly,
yeah,
right? And expressing our emotions, because it says, be angry, feel the emotion,
mhm,
feel the grief, but don't sin.
Yeah.
So as I was processing all of that and feeling as though I'm going to have all of these emotions that aren't satisfying emotions, but that God had called us to feel our emotions, just not sin, that it was honoring to my husband and it was honoring to God to feel them and to sit with them.
Yeah, that's so good. And I'm glad you went to the Psalms. I sometimes find myself encouraging people to go find a psalm that expresses what is deepest in your heart. And what the psalmist did is point it to God. You can do that. He can handle it, however big it is.
Amen.
Yes. Um, you mentioned in just this short version of your story that you shared as we started, that once the grieving is over and you were looking to rebuild your life after it seems like your world ends, how do you do that? And I just maybe want to start with a little half question before that is, how do you know when to start moving on? Because I know when there have been those moments in my life, it's like my brain isn't really comprehending that there can be. It's like the grief or whatever the loss is or whatever, it's so big that I can't imagine what a future would be.
I was the same way. When my husband first died, I did know I needed to have a conversation with God. And so first thing the very next day, I I went to sleep because I envisioned myself needing some energy to have this
Yeah.
conversation with God. I actually envisioned it kind of being one of those Jacob moments where I was going to have to wrestle with God for a moment. And so I felt that I was going to need my energy to do that. So I tried to get some sleep, got up the next morning, and when I approached God with what I thought was going to be this conversation, I only had two words,
Mm.
"What now?"
Yeah.
And in that moment, he said to me, "You honored your husband in life, honor him in death." And so that too was part of that journey.
Yeah.
But then I went to sleep that night. And when I went to sleep, even though earlier that day I had said, God, I can do that. I can honor my husband. You're right. I had honored him in life. I can honor him in death. When it was time to go to bed, to be in that bed alone, that loneliness hit me for the first time. And I started asking God to take me too, because it hit me too that God had made two decisions. He not only had chosen to take my husband, he chose to leave me. And so I asked God to take me too.
Mm.
My husband was in a better place, so I couldn't ask for God to return him to me. So I was asking God to take me.
Mm.
And God, the next morning, I woke up, God had said no, right? I'm like, okay. So here I go again, attempting to
Yeah.
honor my husband. And each night for weeks, each
Mhm.
night for months, I went to bed asking God to take me too.
Mhm.
Well, after a few months, I woke up one morning and I was like, okay, he didn't take me. And I am tired. I was literally, Dr. Carol, sick and tired of feeling sick and tired. And I said, okay, God, at least for now, I know the Bible says I will surely die. So one day I will go to meet my husband again. And you too, right? More importantly,
Yep.
you too. But obviously, you're telling me not today. In fact, I felt God saying that he wanted me to live through the end of the world as I knew it, because that's how I felt about it. It was the end of the world as I knew it. And so I made a decision in that moment that, okay, if I got to be here, I'm not going to spend the rest of my time here hurting the way I am.
Yeah.
You're telling me I can live through this and not just exist. I understood it to be not just exist, that I could live a vibrant and abundant life. I didn't know how at that moment that was going to happen, but I felt God saying that that's what he was challenging me to do. And I accepted that challenge.
Mm. Well, I am grateful that you did. We've kind of alluded to it, but let's be explicit. Although you and I have certainly lost our husbands in death, the principles that you experienced, that you lived through, and that you are now helping others experience doesn't only apply to the death of a loved one, although it does. That there are other times it feels like our world comes to an end. Can you just comment on that for a minute?
Oh, yeah. I think anytime a dream has ended, our world will end. I think anytime that um, things that we are planning our future on disappear, our world ends. I think when a dream job goes away, our world ends. When children run astray, our
Yes.
world ends, right? That one definitely. Um, when things beyond our control, like, we just had Hurricane Debbie strike the United States. And so anytime something devastating physically that, takes away our homes, right, that is traumatizing in that way, or valuables, even if it's not our home, but things of value in our home, that those things can be traumatizing. Um, and that we would have to rebuild, right? And when it's our home, it could be physical as well as emotional and spiritual. But when God doesn't show up the way that we had thought he was going to show up, that we have to do some spiritual rebuilding
Yeah.
around that. And so there's lots of things that can make the house that we built in our lives and our hearts and in our minds come crumbling down, and then we have to rebuild.
Mm. In that rebuilding, you so beautifully lay out that we cooperate with God. It's not that we just sit back and wait for God to drop a new life. The words behind you, God's doing a new thing. But that's not that he just dollops that on us as if from heaven. But it's not that we just strive harder to figure it out. There's a process, a cooperation. I love that perspective because I believe some people who feel like their world has ended just endlessly sit back and say, "Well, God, do something, fix it." Um, and you had to experience that. You had to step up. That it wouldn't happen in an instant. It wasn't like God just was magic, but that it was real. Can you just explore that process a bit?
Yeah, my book is a deep dive into the creation story in chapter 1. And what I saw in the creation story, if I can just give a little background, in verses 1 and 2, it says, "In the beginning, God created the earth, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters." And as I was meditating over that passage, especially the description of the state of the world in the beginning, that it was without form, void, and dark, it struck me that that was my life after when I began rebuilding, that it was chaotic, that it was empty, and that there was a lot of uncertainty and unknown in my life. And I saw that, but yet it started, the first three words were "in the beginning."
Mhm.
So here as I was grieving the end of my husband's life, the end of my marriage, God was saying that the situation I found myself in, part of the reason why I was waking up every morning and God was telling me to live, is because in many ways God was just getting started.
Mm.
And as I read through this passage, the passage doesn't end there, right?
Yeah,
In
yeah.
the end, God has created the first two lives, even though in chapter 2, we really focus on the Adam and Eve and unpack that more.
Mhm.
But in verses 26 through 28, God has created the first two lives, male and female. He has created them in his image, given them positions of power. He has blessed them to be fruitful and multiply. He has given them power, not just put them in a position of power. He has blessed them with power. And at the beginning of chapter 2, we enter his rest. And so, though we start in this chaotic, empty, and uncertain place, at the end, we are powerful
Mm.
and in his rest. And I
Yeah,
said, how can I get more of that at the end? I might have to go through this season. It's the beginning,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
To get to the end. But I like that ending. And so, how
Mhm.
do I get there?
Mhm.
Right? Excuse me. And so, I'm sorry, I forgot the exact question again.
Yeah, that it's not just a zap from God, that we cooperate with him in creating.
Exactly. And that's why I shared with you that passage of chapter 1 through
Yeah.
chapter 2 verse 3, because like I said, he put us in a position of power. He blessed us to be fruitful and multiply, to have dominion in this place that he just placed us. And so we have power. We
Mhm.
don't have all power. God is all
Yeah.
powerful, but he has bestowed on us some power, some agency, some choices we can make. And one of the choices we can make is to join him on this wonderful journey of creating our lives, in blessing us to be fruitful. That is what he's doing. He's inviting us to join him on this great journey of creating our
Yes.
lives. And I wanted that fruitfulness. And so
Mm,
I said yes.
mm. I really appreciated how you highlighted that when it's, dark and formless and void, empty, that God is not absent. That and you just from those first couple of verses, as the Bible begins, that when we feel formless and empty and dark, it doesn't mean God is absent. What might you say to somebody who feels like he is absent when it's dark?
I would say to them that they have not really looked at that verse, that the end of that verse says the Spirit of God was hovering. So God was present in that darkness. Not only that, Psalm 18:11 says, God makes darkness his secret place. So God is often in the darkness, but because we are so focused on the darkness
Yeah.
and the way that we're feeling in the midst of the darkness, empty and chaotic, right, that we fail to see that God is there. And not only is God there, Dr. Carol, but the word says he's hovering. He's not just present, he's moving in the midst of that dark situation. But again, he's hovering, which in the Hebrew is a circular movement. So he's not moving forward, he's moving in place,
Mm.
right there where we are. We don't have to fall into that dark abyss in front of us, right? We can stay connected to God. And that I say is the first step, that when we feel the pull of that dark, chaotic, and empty situation, that like God, we need to rise above it with him and remain with him until he's ready to move forward. And I dare say it's going to be quicker than we think, because the very next verse, he creates light.
Yes. And you go through each of those days of creation and how that is just a picture and a divine pattern of how we cooperate with God in building the life that can yet be. A couple things that I just really wanted to highlight that stood out to me. One is the fruitfulness, and you alluded to the fruitfulness already, that it's not primarily something we do, although there are things we do that end up being fruitful, but it's deeper than that. It has to do with who we are and where that comes from. It's not that we manufacture it from us, but it comes from connection. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Yes. In John 15, it says that we can accomplish nothing, that we can bear no fruit apart from Jesus, that we have to be connected to him. Um, and so that is the key to our fruitfulness, is that connectivity. And in the beginning, right, when God creates the heavens and the earth, he calls forth grass. He tells the earth to bring forth or sprout grass. He tells the earth to begin life. That's what happens in that moment, because that is where life is produced. And Jesus, when we're connected to Jesus, as part of that process of seed time and harvest,
Yeah.
right? Because not only does he say, because he starts with the earth bringing forth fruit, but bringing forth grass. He says there's two types of vegetation: there are herbs and there are fruit trees. And so, in bringing forth this vegetation, God starts seed time and harvest. And more explicitly, he says that fruit is the the um the result of a tree bringing forth a, a a product where the seed is inside that product, whereas an herb tree, its seeds are outside of
Mhm.
the product. An example of that is like spinach, where the seeds grow against the stalk, are produced
Yeah.
against the stalk, as opposed to like a pumpkin or a peach, where the seed is inside. And God provides these two types of vegetation, right? And begins seed time, because we're talking about seeds, and
Hmm.
harvest. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, that whole process is one that God instilled even before creating man.
Yeah.
That this whole idea of fruitfulness was a function of the creation that God provided us.
Yeah. And that we experience being fruitful through connection, like you referenced the Gospel of John 15.
Mhm.
In that process, you also talk about three different kinds of people that we need in our lives. People that are, above, people alongside, and people, coming behind us. That this whole building of a new life is not just for us, that it's bigger. That really blessed me too.
Yes. Um, for many of us, we find ourselves with this God-sized vision, right? For that God has for us, that's our part in building his kingdom. And we look at this vision and we immediately go, yeah, I can't do this by myself. And some of us fall into inadequacy, but it's not about us being inadequate, because God never meant for us to do it by ourselves. What I saw in the creation story, when God created the birds, the marine life, the animals, and the humans, and not only that, the earth and the plants, was God created an ecosystem. And an ecosystem is an environment in which all of the entities in that environment work together to help each other, right? Plants provide oxygen for us to breathe. We provide carbon dioxide for them to breathe. So we all work together so that we all can live in harmony within God's creation. And so when God created these different entities, I found how in our lives too, God wants us to work together just like this ecosystem that he created. And in the organisms that he created, the birds, the marine life, and the beast, I saw a parallel in the types of people God brings into our lives. Excuse me. With the birds, I saw people with a different perspective than the ones we have, because birds can fly high and can see things that we can't see, can see further down the road than we can see. And so I see that as the people who have gone before us, right? The Pauls in our lives who have gone before us, and who pour into us as we're coming along. And then I saw the beasts who are on land just like we are, as the people who come alongside us and help us work, much like a farmer uses animals to plow their fields, right? God has brought people into our lives to help us accomplish the work and that we have to do, and we help them accomplish the work that he's given them. It's a symbiotic relationship. It's not just that they help us, we help each other. We collaborate together in the kingdom. And then the people who have come behind, like you said, then we, like the birds and poured into us, we have a different perspective than those who come behind, and we reach back and pour into them and help them along.
Mm, yeah. um, the ecosystem. Only God could come up with that. And as I have gotten to the point where I am in life and start seeing how the vision that God has given me needs these people, but that connected with them and connected with it's really possible, but only as I do it with the larger group. It's pretty exciting and humbling at the same time, that it's not all about me, but the impact requires these others, and yet it's so great to be a part of that.
You know, you're saying it's not about me and how humbling it is. It's so true. And it's not about me. Like in that inadequate moment, that's a it's all about me moment. It's not so that it's all about me moments are not the moments where we have big heads, right? And we feel like we can do it all by ourselves when we can't. It's
Yeah.
also those moments when we feel like we can't do it at all. We can't even do our part, right? We can't do our part because there are other parts that need to be played when it's the exact opposite. In the parable of the talents, God gave everyone a different number of talents,
Mhm.
right? And the people, he gave one person one talent, one person two talents, and another person five talents. And the two people who made use of their talents got more. So it's not a matter of, well, I can't do it by myself, so I should not do anything at all. It's a matter of I need to do my part and I need to do my part with gusto, and God will make more opportunities for me to do more things the more I do. And in giving me more opportunities, with those opportunities are people who are coming to help. I have never had one opportunity, Dr. Carol, that I got all on my own.
Yep.
That opportunity was an invitation, much like the one that you gave me to come and speak today. And right now, you and I are co laboring and serving your audience and sharing it during this conversation some insight and wisdom that God has given us. That did not come on my own.
Yeah.
God opened a door through you for me to share with your audience. And I thank him for it. And we need to go through those doors when he opens them. But we also need to, in whatever way we can, open doors for other people, right? Because God has given us the ability to open some doors. For instance, I share on social media with ministries that share the people who follow me, I share with them about ministries that I think will bless them. Every month I share a number of ministries with them with a post. And it's a way that I introduce other ministries to my audience so that they can learn from other people. I don't try to keep my audience to myself because that's not what God would have. God says I've placed some wisdom in some other people. I've placed some wisdom in Dr. Carol. And I've placed some wisdom in Dawn, and you guys work together to share that wisdom with everyone in my kingdom. Because how many of you know it takes more than one opportunity to hear something before that seed really gets rooted inside of you? And so God wants other people to sprinkle those seeds so that you have every opportunity to join him in this creation called you.
Mm. That's really good, Dawn. You referenced something I wanted to ask you about next, his creation that is called you. You paint this picture that as God created humankind, it was both a self-portrait. He was both an artist and creating, and also a self-portrait of him. And that was just such an amazing word picture as I thought about that.
Yeah. So, um, I'm not a real big art aficionado in the quote unquote art world. And I'll take a page out of quote someone else, but I know what I like. But anyway, what I do understand about art is that one of the things that people do when they're appreciating a work is they look at the subject and they look at how well the artist captured the subject. So basically, how I see the subject versus how the artist sees the subject, and how well do they align. But then also, too, right, it's what was the artist trying to capture, right? So it's how do I see it? But then how does the artist see it, or how does the author see it, right? And so in creating us, because God was creating us in his image, the subject is him. He was doing a self-portrait at the same time that he was painting us. And so, yeah, I saw that dichotomy there, and that's what God was doing.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Um, in your own journey, I am sure, and you alluded to this several times through the book, that your own understanding of, experience of, way you related to God, um, it's different now than it was then. And maybe as we just start to move toward the end here, I can ask you to reflect for a bit on what is different now in how you see God or understand him or experience him. How has this journey shifted that part of you?
Yeah. When I went into this journey, I didn't understand that God would allow me to experience the level of pain that I went through. And that's part of why I resisted it, because I just didn't I was like, no, my loving God would not allow me
Yeah.
this level of suffering. But as I suffered and learned more about suffering and looked at Jesus
Mhm.
and all of his suffering, yeah, I was under a misunderstanding about suffering.
Mhm.
I thought because I was Christian that and not just me, my husband, that we were the kind of couple that God would want to raise Christian children. And because of that, God wouldn't allow me to have two consecutive miscarriages, that he would allow me to have one because I wasn't special. I didn't consider myself special, but I thought that, like I said, I thought that we were the kind of couple that God would allow
Yeah.
to raise children in the kingdom. And what I found out was that we were the couple that God would allow to suffer, so that people who are also suffering this kind of way would understand that it wasn't the end,
Mm.
right? Like I said, that if God has woken you up this morning,
Yep.
that he has something else for you today, right? And
Mhm.
that's the way I needed to embrace that if I was waking up today, that there was more for me,
Yeah.
and that I was going to embrace that more. And that God was, and it wasn't that he wasn't a good God, because God gave me some wonderful things in this journey. All of these insights that I've shared with you are wonderful things. The opportunity to share these insights with you are beautiful things, right? The book is a beautiful thing, right? The opportunity to meet Dr. Carol, right, is a beautiful thing. There are so many beautiful things that the Lord has given me along this journey that I can't say that he's not a good and loving God. What I'm saying is that as part of being a good and loving God and loving other people, as he was loving me, he allowed me to suffer so that I could share some of his love with them.
Mm.
And that's what I came to understand.
Mm. Well, I, for one, am grateful that God did wake you up this morning. And I pray there are more mornings He wakes you up and that this journey just bless your socks off and many others. For people who may have been touched by hearing how you learned to move forward after your world came to an end, and they may be feeling like they want some help in this process, just let our listeners know a little bit about the kind of ministry you're involved in now and where they can connect with you and your book and just the beautiful things that you do.
Okay. Excuse me. Yes. You can find me at dawnmansanders.com, DawnMannsanders.com. And if you visit me there, you will find my blog where I write to people who are rebuilding their lives and give them insights and tips about how to do that. I also unpack, just like I do the creation story. There are other passages of scripture that I unpacked from the perspective of someone who is rebuilding their lives. So you will get not only tips, but you'll get some biblical teaching as well mixed in. I also have some freebies, one of which is a new quiz, which is called What is Your Starting Over Type? And if you take a couple of minutes to fill out this quiz, you will find out what your starting over type is, and a description of getting to know you a little better. But along with that description, I'll give you 3 action steps that you can take immediately to start moving forward. I do want to caution, as Dr. Carol mentioned, these are things for people to do post bereavement,
Yeah,
that you do want to give time and space to grief.
yeah,
And so I very much want to let you know that these are things for when you're ready to move forward. You can go ahead and take the quiz so that you are prepared for when you're ready to move forward. But I just want you to know that the case.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I have a lot of things for you, different resources. I'm going to be starting a podcast soon. And so
Right.
you'll be able to find out more about that there as well, and be able to invite people like Dr. Carol in to share with my audience some tidbits as we've shared with you today.
Mm. Well, Dawn, thank you so much. This has been an honor for us to just have this conversation. Thank you for just the generosity of your heart and your life, and many, many blessings to you going forward.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And it was nice to talk to you and share a little bit with your audience.
Oh, check the links, folks. You know I say that, but this is really one where you need to. We have the links there to Dawn's book, When Your World Ends, God's Creative Process for Rebuilding a Life, as well as her website and social media and so on. And take the quiz. Yeah, short and fun. And what kind of a rebuilding your life kind of person are you? And God uses the way we are created in just walking through this process of rebuilding a life. So thank you for staying with me till this point in the program. Wherever you are in the process of rebuilding your life, just know, like Dawn said, that if you woke up this morning, that God has something else for you yet to do. He's not finished with you yet. If you are in the middle of a grieving process, I also want to offer you our 30-day devotional, The Christian's Journey Through Grief. If you're not really at the rebuilding stage yet and you're walking through the grief process, we have that link under this video as well, about just that 30 days of letting God's word and a bit of encouragement nourish your soul in walking through this process. I would also love to hear from you. You can use the contact page on our website, drcarolministries.com. It's confidential. I'd love to hear from you there. You can also leave a comment under this video. And please, if you're not already, subscribe. Subscribe to our channel so you can get this material every time we put something up. Thank you again for being with me here. And until next time, may God bless you.